Have you ever known the truth and still stayed quiet? Not because you're weak, but because speaking up costs too much. This story isn't about a courtroom. It's about the moment you learn how the world really works and what it quietly asks you to sacrifice. In this video, you'll learn why good people stay silent, how society trains you to betray your own values, and what it actually takes to keep your integrity when the crowd turns against you. This isn't a summary. It's a psychological breakdown of To Kill a Mockingbird and why its message still follows you today. If you've ever felt pressure to shrink yourself, stay quiet, or go along just to survive, stay with me. By the end of this video, you'll see the story and yourself very differently. Chapter 1. The book that didn't ask for your permission. Have you ever felt your stomach tighten when a truth gets too close to you? That's what this story does. Not with violence, not with shock, but with a slow, quiet pressure. To Kill a Mockingbird isn't famous because it's a classic. It's famous because it exposes something most people spend their whole lives hiding: the human talent for pretending. The book was written by Harper Lee, a woman who didn't chase fame like a hungry animal. She watched, she listened, she waited, and then she wrote a town. A small place, polite faces, clean porches, Sunday clothes, but under it, a shared agreement, a deal. We will not speak about what we all know. That's the real setting. Not Alabama, not the 1930s. The real setting is the human mind when it wants comfort more than honesty. And here's the twist people miss. This book wasn't even born as this book. Harper Lee originally wrote a different version of the story, one where the child grows up and returns to the town. But her editor pushed her back into the childhood years, back into the part of life where you still believe adults mean what they say. So she rewrote it, not as a history lesson, as a psychological trap, because childhood is where you learn the rules of the world. And this town teaches one rule above all: if you tell the truth, you will pay. And if you think that's just fiction, you're lying to yourself. This might sound bad, but it's real. Most people don't fear being wrong. They fear being rejected. That fear builds silent prisons. And the book opens the door. Not gently. It opens it like a judge and asks you one question. Chapter 2. The town that trains you to stay quiet. Have you ever noticed how people don't control you with chains? They control you with looks? That's Mockingbird. Not a town, a training ground. Teaches you early that belonging is a currency. And if you want to keep it, you learn the art of smiling while swallowing your own truth. This is how social order really works. Not through laws, through pressure. You say the wrong thing, and suddenly the room gets colder. You feel it, even if nobody speaks. That's not imagination. That's biology. Studies on social rejection by Naomi Eisenberger and Matthew Lieberman in 2003 found that the brain processes exclusion like physical pain. So when a town punishes you with silence, your nervous system reacts like you're being attacked. That's why people obey crowds. Not because they're stupid, but because they're afraid. And Mockingbird is full of fear dressed as manners. They call it tradition. They call it respect. But beneath those words is something darker. A shared commitment to keep the same people on top. And if someone threatens that arrangement, the town doesn't argue. It labels, it gossips, it isolates. This is where the book becomes bigger than the courtroom. Because the trial isn't only happening in a courthouse. It's happening in every living room, every porch, every whisper. And the lesson is simple. If you want peace in a cowardly society, you must become smaller. You must become quieter. You must become agreeable. That's how the town survives. But it's also how the town decays. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you can live a good life no matter what surrounds you. But he never said it would be comfortable. So ask yourself this. Seriously. Chapter 3. The courtroom is a stage. Your life is too. Have you ever felt like people weren't listening to what you said, but watching how you said it? That's the courtroom. Not a place of truth, a place of performance. And the brutal part is this: Most of your life works the same way. In Maycomb, the trial is supposed to be about evidence, but everyone already knows the ending. Not because they studied the facts, because they studied the hierarchy. The town isn't asking, "What happened?" The town is asking, "Who is allowed to be innocent?" That's why the story hurts, because it shows how justice can be replaced by a social ritual. A clean room, serious faces, a man speaking calmly, and still, the outcome is decided by something invisible. Status, fear, a shared story the town refuses to rewrite. This might sound devilish, but it's true. People don't want fairness. They want their side to win without guilt. Even today, we call it common sense, or how things are, but it's just bias wearing a suit. Studies on implicit bias by Anthony Greenwald and Mazarine Banaji in 1995 showed that people can hold automatic associations they don't consciously endorse. So someone can swear they're fair and still punish you with their instincts. That's the tragedy. Not that evil people exist, but that ordinary people can become cruel while believing they're decent. And Atticus stands in that room like a man holding a candle in wind. Not because he thinks he'll win, but because he refuses to lie with the crowd. Seneca once warned that the approval of the masses is a weak foundation. And this book proves it. Because when the crowd decides your value, your life becomes theater. So here's the question that should hit you in the chest. Chapter 4. The Clean Lie of the Good People. Have you ever looked at someone and thought, "They're nice," then later realized they were just harmless? That's one of the most dangerous confusions in life. Maycomb is full of good people. They wave, they smile, they invite you in. But when the moment comes to choose between truth and comfort, their goodness becomes soft, then silent, then absent. This chapter of the story is where the book gets sharp, because it exposes a truth you probably already know. Most people are not evil. They're worse. They're compliant. They don't beat you. They just let you be beaten. And they tell themselves a clean story afterward. "I didn't do anything." Exactly. That's the crime. This might sound harsh, but it's real. The world is rarely destroyed by monsters. It's destroyed by polite bystanders. Psychology has a name for this. Studies on the bystander effect by John Darley and Bibb Latané in 1968 found that people are less likely to help when others are present. Responsibility dissolves in a crowd. So a whole town can watch injustice happen and still sleep at night because everyone feels only 1% guilty. And 1% guilt feels like nothing. That's how Maycomb stays calm. Not through innocence, through shared denial. Now here's the deeper point. The town doesn't hate Atticus because he's wrong. They hate him because he forces them to see themselves. And that's the real reason people attack moral courage. Not because it threatens their power, but because it threatens their self-image. Nietzsche understood this part of the human animal. People don't want to be better. They want to feel better. And those are not the same. So ask yourself, quietly, in your life, who are the good people that stay quiet when it matters? And harder. Chapter 5. The Man Who Stayed Calm While Everyone Got Ugly. Have you ever wondered if staying calm is strength, or just a slower way to surrender? Atticus Finch forces that question, because he doesn't fight like the world expects. No shouting, no chaos, no public rage, just a steady voice, a straight back, a refusal to bend. And in a town like Maycomb, that kind of calm is almost offensive. Not because it's weak, but because it's disciplined. And discipline makes people nervous. Here's what most people miss. Atticus isn't trying to win the trial the way a hungry man tries to win a meal. He's trying to keep something intact. His own mind, his own integrity. Stoicism isn't about being cold. It's about not letting your emotions become someone else's weapon. And Maycomb is a town full of emotional weapons. Shame, gossip, threats, social exile. They want him reactive, because when you react, you can be controlled. This is why crowds love provocation. They don't want truth. They want you unstable. Robert Greene wrote that the easiest person to defeat is the one who cannot control himself. And that's not just politics. That's daily life. This might sound bad, but it's true. Most people don't lose because they're wrong. They lose because they get baited. Atticus doesn't take the bait. He doesn't even pretend the town is fair. He simply acts like a man who refuses to let injustice turn him into a clown. And the quiet lesson is brutal. You can't always control the outcome, but you can control whether you become bitter, desperate, or cheap in the process. So ask yourself this. No comfort, no excuses. The video is half finished. If you like the video, be sure to comment and watch the next steps. Chapter 6. The Child's Eyes. The Price of Growing Up. Have you ever felt your innocence crack? Not from one big event, but from 1,000 small disappointments? That's Scout. And that's the real heartbeat of this book. The story isn't told through a philosopher. It's told through a child. Not because children are cute, because children still notice what adults have trained themselves to ignore. A child doesn't have the town's excuses yet. They haven't mastered the adult art of calling cruelty normal. So Scout watches. And what she watches is simple. Adults talk about honor, then behave like cowards. Adults talk about God, then enjoy punishment. Adults talk about justice, then worship status. And slowly, the child begins to understand the truth that hurts the most. Growing up isn't learning more. It's learning what people are willing to do and still sleep. This might sound dark, but it's accurate. A lot of adulthood is just spiritual compromise with better vocabulary. And the town is a factory for that compromise. Psychology has a word for the discomfort Scout feels. Studies on cognitive dissonance by Leon Festinger in 1957 showed that when people hold conflicting beliefs, they feel tension. Then they change the belief, not the behavior. So adults don't stop being cruel. They just rewrite the story in their head. I had no choice. It's complicated. That's just how it is. Scout can't do that yet. So she feels the raw truth. And that's why her perspective is so dangerous. Because she reminds you of the person you were before you learn to lie smoothly. This chapter isn't about childhood. It's about the moment you realize the world doesn't corrupt you with darkness. Corrupts you with permission. One excuse at a time. So here's the question, and it's personal. Chapter 7. Boo Radley. The monster you invented. Have you ever feared someone before you ever met them? Not because they hurt you, but because people told you to fear them. That's Boo Radley. And this part of the story is quieter than the trial, but in some ways more revealing. Because Boo isn't a villain. He's a blank wall. And the town paints their anxieties on him like graffiti. That's how humans work. When you don't understand something, you don't stay neutral. You fill the gap. With rumors. With worst-case stories. With imagination that turns into fact. This might sound bad, but it's a hard truth. People don't just fear danger. They fear difference. And if someone lives outside the town's normal rhythm, they become a symbol, not a person. A symbol. Maycomb doesn't know Boo, so Maycomb creates Boo. That's the psychological crime. And it's not limited to small towns. You see it online every day. Someone becomes a headline, a clip, a label. Then millions of people hate a person they've never actually met. Sun Tzu said that if you don't know your enemy, you will be defeated. But here's the modern twist. Sometimes you don't even have an enemy. You just have an empty space. And your mind fills it with a monster. Psychology backs this up. Studies on illusory correlation by David Hamilton and Robert Gifford in 1976 found that people tend to over-associate minority groups with negative behaviors, even when the data doesn't support it. So the mind doesn't just observe reality. It edits reality. Boo Radley becomes the proof. The town doesn't attack him openly. They do something more cowardly. They erase him. They keep him trapped in story form. And when you reduce a human being to a rumor, you don't need to feel guilty. Because you're not hurting a person. You're hurting a myth. So let me ask you something that might sting. Who in your life have you never understood, but still judged? And even worse. Chapter 8. When the verdict is already written. Have you ever walked into a room knowing the decision was made before you spoke? That's the quiet horror at the center of this story. Not the violence, not the slurs, but the certainty that truth will enter the room and leave unchanged. The verdict in Maycomb isn't a failure of evidence. It's a success of social order. Everything works exactly as designed, because the court isn't there to discover truth. It's there to protect a story, and stories are fragile things. They tell people who they are, who deserves respect, who must stay in their place. So when truth threatens that structure, the system responds like an immune reaction. It rejects. This might sound cruel, but it's accurate. Institutions don't preserve justice. They preserve themselves. That's not cynicism. That's observation. Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology gave it names. Power rarely asks if it is right. It asks if it will survive. And survival often demands sacrifice. Not of leaders, of outsiders. What makes this chapter heavy is not that injustice happens. It's that everyone expects it. Even the people who argue against it. That's the deepest damage. When hope shrinks so much that dignity becomes the only remaining goal. Studies on learned helplessness by Martin Seligman in 1967 found that when individuals are repeatedly exposed to uncontrollable outcomes, they stop trying to change them, even when escape becomes possible. That's what the verdict does. Teaches silence. It trains people to lower their expectations of fairness. And once that lesson is learned, it spreads. Quietly, generationally, so the trial ends. But the real consequence begins afterward. A society that teaches you not to expect justice eventually teaches you not to ask for it. So ask yourself this without comfort. Chapter 9. The aftermath nobody talks about. Have you ever noticed how the loudest damage happens after the noise is gone? That's where this chapter lives. After the verdict, after the speeches, after everyone goes home and pretends life is normal again. This is the part stories usually skip, because it's uncomfortable. The trial ends, but the town doesn't heal. It stiffens. People don't reflect. They reset. They return to routine because routine is anesthetic. And this is where the real psychological shift happens. Injustice stops shocking you. It becomes background noise. This might sound cold, but it's precise. When wrongdoing becomes familiar, outrage feels childish. So people mature into indifference. Not because they are evil, but because caring costs too much. You lose friends, status, safety. So the town chooses emotional economy. Spend nothing. Feel little. Move on. Stoicism warns against false peace. There's a difference between accepting what you cannot control and numbing yourself to avoid responsibility. One is wisdom, the other is decay. And Maycomb chooses decay with good manners. Here's the subtle danger. Children are watching. They learn that doing the right thing doesn't bring justice. It brings isolation. So they adjust their ambitions. They don't ask, what is right? They ask, what is survivable? That lesson shapes a lifetime. Psychology calls this moral disengagement. Albert Bandura showed in 1999 that people justify harmful systems by reframing actions as normal, necessary, or inevitable. That's how societies stay functional while becoming hollow. Nobody feels guilty anymore, because guilt requires awareness, and awareness is tiring. So let me ask you something that won't leave you alone. Chapter 10 of 10. The Mockingbird still sings. After everything you've seen, do you still believe quiet goodness can survive? This is where the story closes. Not with victory, but with restraint. The mockingbird is never loud. It doesn't fight back. It doesn't dominate the sky. It just sings. And that's the final insult to a violent world. Because it proves something uncomfortable. Goodness doesn't need permission to exist. It doesn't win every battle. It doesn't get applause. It doesn't control outcomes. But it refuses to disappear. Atticus doesn't change the town. Scout doesn't fix the system. The verdict still stands. And yet, something survives. A standard, a memory, a quiet line that says, This is how a human can act even here. Stoicism teaches that your duty is not to control the world, but to refuse corruption within yourself. That's not inspiring. It's heavier than inspiration, because it leaves you without excuses. This might sound unsettling, but it's honest. The world doesn't need more outrage. It needs more people who don't rot under pressure. That's the real legacy of this book. Not moral victory, moral endurance. And endurance doesn't look heroic. It looks boring, lonely, often misunderstood. But it's the only thing that outlives mobs and moments. So the mockingbird still sings, not because the world became kind, but because someone decided not to become cruel. Now the question isn't about the book anymore. It's about you. Thank you very much for watching my video, and please like and subscribe to my channel.